So the next step, obviously, that we have to do is we have to configure the AAA configuration. It doesn't matter where we start, but it strikes me that R7's configuration will be a little bit simpler because the only thing that we have to do is define the TACAX server and we're pretty much done. So let's start with R7. So on R7 here, we are asked to authenticate R8 using CHAP. R8's username should be router8 and password IP expert. And R7 should use TACAX server at 1111. So let's start there. So I'm just going to say TACAX server host 1111 key IP expert. Then obviously I know that for this I'm going to need AAA new model. And then it says here, if TACAX is not available, use the local case insensitive database. So what I need to do here is I need to define AAA authentication PPP, and here I'm going to specify the list. So let me just separate these a little bit like this. So here I have to define something that is called the list name, and then I specify method followed by different methods. Now, this is the generic format of the AAA authentication command. So let me explain it a little bit in detail how it works. Now, when we have AAA, the next thing here that we are specifying is the sub-mode of AAA. And AAA here stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. So here we are telling our iOS that we are configuring the authentication. Here we are specifying for which service in the iOS we are going to provide the authentication. In this case, we are telling the iOS, okay, this configuration is for PPP service on interfaces that have specified that they want to use this list of authentication methods. The default list name is, of course, default. And if you don't specify anything else on the interface, this is what ends up being used. And method here can be different things. It can be group radius. It can be group TACAX. It can be group and then your own name, and this is something that I will talk about a little bit later. It can be local or it can be local case. Now, there are a couple of others, but these are the most important ones. Now, obviously, for our current example, what we need is group TACAX, and if that fails, we need to use the local case insensitive database. Now, this means that we are going to be using the local because local case is the actual case sensitive. And also keep in mind that this pertains only to username because the password in iOS is always case sensitive. You cannot have case insensitive password for AAA authentication. So the actual command line that we need to enter here is AAA authentication PPP, and then we need to specify the list. And the list can be anything, it can be default, but let's use something else. So let's say R7, R8. And here in method lists, we need group TACAX. And finally, we need to specify the local database. Now, the last thing that we need here is on the interface itself. So interface serial 000, where we had PPP authentication, and this is, I believe, R7 that we are working on, so my memory is not that good. So interface serial 000, here we are using PPP authentication CHAP. So I'm going to say PPP authentication CHAP, and here we are going to bind the list with the interface configuration. So let me maybe add this here. So what we're going to have next, we're going to have the interface X and then PPP authentication. Method, or actually let me use a different keyword there. Protocol and then list. And here the list is actually what binds this with the interface. So here we are saying AAA new model, enabling the new functionality of the AAA, so basically enabling the AAA services. We are saying for PPP, authentication service for PPP, list is R7, R8. We are going to be using all the defined TACAC servers and then local database. And here we are defining the TACAC server that we will be needing. And finally, we are telling the router to use this authentication method. So if I go to my R7 here, and when I paste this in, absolutely nothing should happen. Why? Because the user is already authenticated and there is no reason to actually re-authenticate the user when we have changed this. Now I can bounce the interface, and that would be a good idea for testing purposes here, to shut the interface down and do the no shutdown. And pretty much the interface is going to change state to up immediately. Now, even though we don't have the TACAC server, TACAC is TCP based, which means that at the point of authentication, the router can very quickly go from method 1 to method 2, because if we don't have the TCP session, if we try to establish it, there is no TCP session forming, we know that TACAC server is not responding, so that we can go back and fall back to the second method. Now, because Radius is UDP based, with Radius, we need to do some more configuration if we want to have this faster failover, because Radius is UDP based. When we send the UDP packet out, we don't know if it was received or not. We can just wait and hope to receive the response. If we don't receive the response in a particular period of time, then we can declare the Radius server as unresponsive. So for Radius, we might need to do some acrobatics to actually make it work so faster. But anyways, this bit has now been fully completed because we have done all this. Now let's take a look at this stuff here. Obviously, we have an easy part, which is pretty much replicating what we've done on R7, and then we have this a little bit more advanced stuff. Again, you know my approach to these things. I'm going to do the easy bit first, make sure it works, and then go back and do a little bit more complicated one. So let me go back to my text editor here, and pretty much what I'm going to have here is AAA new model, PPP authentication, PPP, R7, R8, that's good. Group, instead of TACAC, we are going to be using Radius. And instead of local, we are going to be using local case, because the task calls for case-sensitive authentication. Here, instead of TACAC server, we are going to use the Radius server. And host is, what was the host? 2222. The key is IP expert. Now, there is one thing in the task here that is important. It says use the standard port numbers. Now, in iOS, there are two sets of Radius port numbers. Those two sets of Radius port numbers are 1645, I believe, and 1646. These are traditional ones. And also sometimes they might be referred to as Portmaster ports or Livingston ports, because it was Livingston, the company called Livingston, later bought by Lucent, which is now, I believe, part of Alcatel, or sorry, Alcatel-Lucent. They were the ones who originally invented Radius, and these are the ports that they used. Now, the standard ports are 1812 and 1813. So these are the standard ports defined in the RFC. Now, iOS, by default, uses the old port, 1645 and 1646. Now, these two ports exist because this one is used for authentication, and this one is used for accounting. The same thing here. This is authentication, and this is used for accounting packets. Technically speaking, there is a third port in the set, which is 1814 here, which is used for proxy. Now, there might be a 1647, but I'm not going to write it down because the Radius proxy protocol was invented a little bit later, well, long after Lucent stopped after Portmaster or Livingston Portmaster stopped existing. And I'm just going to leave 1814, but you are not going to see these ports. This is mostly on the server side, not on the iOS. So you are never going to see this in iOS. I just wanted to kind of throw it in there for the sake of being, well, a little bit broader than just focusing strictly on the exam. So our task here calls for using the standard port number. So we need to make sure that our Radius server is using 1812 and 1813. So to address this here, before I enter the key, I'm going to say authentication port 1812 and accounting port 1813. Now, I'm not going to put any timeouts or anything of the sort just yet in there. And here I'm going to say authentication PAP. So for now, I just want this to work. So this goes on R8. Is it on R8? Yes, it's on R8. So wrong router. Let me go to R8. Configure terminal, pasting this in. Oops, there is one space there missing. So let me put this in. So you see now that Radius is using authentication port 1812 and accounting port 1813. If I go on the interface serial 000 and I do shutdown and I do no shutdown. Now observe this. The interface is going to, did I do no shutdown on R7? It might actually speed up the process if the interface is no shut. Okay, maybe I was just too quick. So let me shut the interface down, wait for it to go shut down. Okay, now I'm going to say no shutdown. So observe this. What's going to happen now is the interface is going to change state to up, but the line protocol is not coming up. And it's not going to be coming up for about 40 seconds. After 40 seconds, it will come up. So let's wait for it to come up and then I will show you why this is happening. Okay, so now we can see that the line protocol changed state to up. So I'm going to start by shutting it down and then I'm going to say do debug, Radius authentication. So let's see what the Radius is doing. So now I'm going to do no shutdown, and what we're going to see when the interface changes state to up, we can see the Radius request going out. And we can see that the port in use is 1812. Then the Radius request times out and we are retransmitting once, retransmitting twice, retransmitting the third time, and only when this times out, we are going to fall back to using a different authentication method. So now we say, okay, this has failed, so now the interface has changed state to up. So now the interface comes up. And this is what I was telling you earlier. Because Radius is UDP based, we cannot tell if the Radius server is alive or not by simply trying to establish the connection to it, because there is no connection. We need to send the authentication request and then wait for the response. If we don't get it, the server might or might not be dead. So Radius in iOS implementation by default sends the original request and 3 retransmits, which means that in total 4 packets are going to be sent by default. So let's take a look at our task here. It says only a single Radius packet should be sent per authentication request and response should arrive within 3 seconds before declaring Radius as unreachable. So right now, instead of sending a single packet, we are sending 4. What we need to do here is we need to change Radius server host, and actually we need to retype the whole command line, otherwise we're going to get rid of the port number. So maybe the best thing to do that would be here. What we need to do here is we need to change the retransmit value from the default value of 3, we need to change it to 0. Now, keep in mind that retransmit 1 would be an incorrect solution, because retransmit 1 would mean sending 2 packets, the transmission and the retransmission. So with retransmit 0, we are telling the router, send the original transmission, send the original authentication request, and if it times out, the radius is dead. But if it times out within 3 seconds, so we need to set the timeout as well. So this is the correct configuration. Oops. This is the correct configuration. Oh, let me see. I think there is importance in order there. So I need retransmit 0, but timeout before it. Oh, let me see. I guess I'd need to put that in 2 different lines. So let me see. So let's see this. Oh, you see how it changed the authentication ports here to different ones? So what we need is to change this command line here. It's consistency of iOS. Sometimes you have to be very, very careful about things you are doing. 1813 and 1812, and just to be on the safe and very paranoid side, and paranoia is sometimes good. It's a disease, but sometimes it's good having it, especially when dealing with CCIE lab. So this would be the correct configuration. Oh, you see the port numbers here changed. No matter what I do, they are going to change to 1645, 1646, but I believe that this command line will actually override that. So let's test. So I'm going to say interface serial 000 shutdown. I'm surprised nobody's screaming any questions right now. So let's do no shutdown and see the request goes out. It needs to go to 1812. So let's see. Let's see. Nope, it is going to 1645. So let's see how we can. Nope, hold on a second. It actually went to 1812. Something is not quite right here. So give me just 1 second here, please. I'm going to try to add this line here. That's better. There was something wrong in the original command line, so it can be done in the single one. So apologies about that. Oh, Jesus. Okay, this is correct now. So we have authentication port, accounting port, timeout, retransmit, key, IP export. Wow, iOS, gotta love it. So shutting down the interface and making sure that it works correctly. So now what we have seen here is a single request going out, and we can see here that it was actually sent to 1812. Let's see where is the first reference to it. So here it is. We are sending to 2222 1812. Then we are getting no response. There was no response from the radio server, and we are switching out to a different interface. And we can see the timing here. So we can see that this was on October the 1st, 2929. I don't know in which time zone, but it could be UTC. 05. So if you scroll down here, at around 8 seconds, so exactly 3 seconds after we have sent the original request, the radius actually was declared dead, and the line protocol change state up, which means that the fallback authentication worked. The question was too much work for 3 points. Well, not really too much work. I mean, keep in mind that in the lab you don't have to explain to anyone how this stuff works. Now, this is taking too much time because I'm explaining, I'm showing you what ifs, I'm showing you the caveats, I'm showing you the things that you need to be on a lookout for. This is really maybe 1 or 2 minutes task. It's just typing out the commands, doing them in the right order, and you are done. You are moving on to the next task, right? So it's not really too much work, but you know, it's important to know what is happening there. It is also not too much work to be astronaut and fly a space shuttle. Once you have done it about 150 times in a simulator, then it's fine. But you know, if you're doing it for the first time, of course it's going to be a lot of work. What does this button do? What does this switch do? Same thing here. You need to be on the lookout for things. You need to understand what's happening. Yes, it involves a lot of work, but this is really not that complicated. So at this point, we are actually done with our configuration of this task,